Hello again and welcome on back to Top 5 Scary. I'm Taylor, your casual crypt keeper. I got something for you. We love a good alien story around Top 5 Scary, and the only thing we like more than an alien story is an alien abduction story. So let's take a look at some wild true stories from Redditors who claim they've been up in the air in a flying saucer. Let's take a listen to the top 5 people who mysteriously disappeared after a UFO sighting. Let me know down below which one of these stories enticed you the most. Now let's get right into it. Number 5, Great Aunt Eater. Our first story today is going to be this one shared to us from Reddit, in which this user posted a thread claiming that they had been abducted by aliens and that you should ask them anything. Let's take a listen to their story and see what we think, if it holds water or if it's just a tall tale. It happened about 3 years ago in a rural part of Virginia. I don't really remember it like a real memory, but more like a dream. That being said, no, I was not asleep. I was driving home from a friend's house when it happened. I can remember vaguely what they looked like and a few other things. When my memory kicks back in, I'm sitting outside the car on the side of the road. I have never told police and I never plan on it. The aliens I remember as looking rather reptilian. They weren't your cliche big heads, gray skin, but they were bipedal. Their craft I don't rightly remember, apart from the inside being very smooth and very bright above me. It is scary to think about, but I do remember a few things they did to me. I wore a mask of some sort and they pulled hairs. There was a minute buzzing I recall and a thing over the top of my head. There were several of them. When I woke up, I was fully clothed, beside my car, on the same road I was traveling on when I last remembered. I had no scars or puncture marks or any markings, so I don't think they injected me or anything. I wasn't gone for any large amount of time, only a few hours from what I guess, and I haven't told anyone but my brother who knows me. He was just baffled and then curious. Going through the thread, the Redditor does add some minor insight on some questions, even providing a crude diagram of one of the aliens. Unfortunately, not much more detail than that is known, but isn't that the case with all stories of unknown flying objects? They're unknown for a reason. And if you're looking for way more stories of unknown flying objects, well, Top 5 Scary has all of that and then some to spare. We've been doing videos on aliens for a long time, my friends. So hit subscribe so you don't miss any of that. Please make sure you ring that little bell as well, and that way you'll get every one of our videos notified to you as soon as they go up. But do that at the end of this video, because I got 4 more abduction stories for you coming right now. Number 4, Ethiopia's abduction. Alright, this next one is wild. Also from Reddit, take a little listen. In the 1960s in Ethiopia, my dad was a child at the time playing with his best friend Gabriel after school. They were playing in the fenced backyard of my dad's house. My dad turned his back for a second, then turned to look back at his friend, and Gabriel was gone. Now, it's important to note that my dad and Gabriel were both from the top 1% of Ethiopia's ruling class. My dad's father was Minister of Interior of Ethiopia, and Gabriel's father was a 4-star general of Ethiopia. The backyard Gabriel had disappeared from had 10-foot bricked walls with armed soldiers patrolling on the outside. A couple of hours pass. His parents, my dad's parents, and guards are searching, but nobody finds him. 48 hours pass. Now there's a nationwide search for this important kid. It's on the news. Police are searching door to door, describing him and what he was wearing when he disappeared. He was wearing a private school uniform. Helicopters even searched the countryside looking for him, but still nothing. A month passes, then 2, then 4. People start losing hope that he would ever be found and think the worst. Exactly 6 months to the day he disappeared, Gabriel appears back in my dad's backyard. He looked exactly the same as when he disappeared. And this is where things start to get weird. Once they confirmed he was okay, they start asking him where he'd been. He said a couple of nice men took him on a trip. He was in a white room that glowed, and other children were there from different countries. The white glowing room had no windows, and the doors disappeared into walls. There were buttons on the walls, and if someone pushed them, a bed would come out. He was then all of a sudden in a city that was glowing and clean, but with flying cars. He said there were people there, but they looked strange, like us, but different. One was a nice man who was still with him and took him to a tall building where they had to stay for a while. The man showed him a room for entertainment. Gabriel said he could push a button and the room itself would go places, including an open field, the beach, then the room itself would travel. He said after a couple hours, he was taken back to Ethiopia and appeared in the backyard. He thought he was only gone for a couple hours total. Obviously, no one believed him, and with Ethiopia being a very religious country, most adults around him thought that he had got possessed. Gabriel was even forced to see a priest to get the spirits out of him. My dad kept in contact with him. He got a doctorate in physics and I believe works in Holland these days. That's where the post concludes, but if that story is true, that sounds like one of the most wild abduction stories I've ever heard. Keeping someone for 6 months, but he thought it was just a few hours.
Number 3, the mystery cave. So it's not that unusual that people disappear, obviously ergo making today's list, but the vanishing of Kenny Veach is truly bizarre. There are several strange aspects about his case, and it's impossible to say what really happened. What did he see and feel when he entered the mysterious cave in the Nevada desert? So according to himself, he said shortly before he vanished, there were some supernatural forces in said cave. So, pardon me, let me backtrack and elaborate. Kenny, a man who loved hiking, disappeared on Monday, November 10th of 2014. He told his family that he was going on a short overnight trip into the Sheep Mountains in Nevada. Sadly, that wasn't the case, or it wouldn't be newsworthy today. 1 month earlier, he had allegedly discovered a very strange cave in the Mojave Desert. He said the cave evoked a strange, possibly supernatural occurrence within him, and he had to explore it. He wanted to show the world the unusual cave he had discovered, but obviously he didn't return home from his trip and was never seen again. Before his disappearance, Kenny commented on a YouTube video claiming to have found a cave, around the Nellis Air Force Base. And Kenny was apparently a brave explorer and entered every cave he came across, but this particular cave frightened him. To quote directly, he wrote, "I am a long distance hiker. One time during one of my hikes out by Nellis Air Force Base, I found a hidden cave. The entrance to the cave was shaped like a perfect capital M. I always enter every cave I find, but as I began to enter this particular cave, my whole body began to vibrate. The closer I got to the cave entrance, the worse the vibrating became. Suddenly I became very scared and hightailed it out of there. This is one of the strangest things that ever happened to me." So Kenny said that he would return to the cave, bringing a camera and a weapon with him, and did wind up making a video showing himself looking for the cave. He posted it on YouTube, but the desert is large and it's impossible to locate the cave based on the video. And what happens next is our mystery. All I know is that Kenny returned to the site a month later to find the cave, and he was never seen or heard from again. The only thing we do know is that a search party was formed by Nevada rescue volunteers. They found Kenny's cell phone near an abandoned mine shaft about a week after his disappearance, but there were no traces of Kenny himself. No body, clothes, or other belongings have ever been found. The dangerous cave has not been located, and Kenny seems to have vanished into thin air. Number 2, Percy Faucet. So if you ever wondered who or what inspired Indiana Jones, look no further than Mr. Percy Harrison Fawcett, who is rarely seen without his trademark hat. Hey, as someone who recently cosplayed a femme version of Dr. Jones myself, trust me when I say I understand the importance of never losing that dang hat. In terms of the real man though, his resume included a stint as a British artilleryman in Sri Lanka, a tour of duty in World War I, and a top secret gig as a spy in Morocco. He was most famous for his half a dozen map-making expeditions to the wilds of the Amazon, a place he called the last great blank space in the world. Beginning in 1906, Fawcett had ventured into previously uncharted territory in Brazil and Bolivia, where he dodged poisonous pit vipers and made contact with local tribes. Ugh. The thought of snake pits will always make me shudder. Nope, nope, nope! His exploits grabbed headlines around the world and won him a prestigious medal from the Royal Geographical Society. Along with making his name as one of the world's great explorers, Fawcett's adventures also led him to develop the theory that an advanced and ancient city lay in the Amazon. Somewhere. His run-ins with locals had convinced him that it was possible for large groups to thrive in the unforgiving environment of the rainforest, and he'd stumbled upon references to sophisticated settlements in the histories of the European conquistadors. He was particularly enthralled by a Portuguese fortune hunter's 1753 account of a stone jungle metropolis of great size and grandeur, if you will. As the years passed, Fawcett became more and more obsessed with seeking out this modern-day El Dorado, which he dubbed the city of Zed, or Z. He launched 2 searches for it in the early 1920s, but was driven out of the jungle on both occasions by poor weather, fever, and exhaustion. It took more than 3 years of campaigning before he finally secured funding for a 3rd mission. Despite warnings that he was taking off on a fool's errand, the 57-year-old explorer remained convinced that Z was lurking somewhere in the unexplored Mato Grosso region of Brazil. Fawcett had no shortage of volunteers for his final expedition, but he opted to take along his 21-year-old son Jack, who shared his near-religious zeal for the Z theory, and his son's best friend, Raleigh Rimmel. After loading up on mosquito netting, canned food, machetes, and other provisions, the trio set sail from New Jersey in January of 1925, vowing to return with proof for once and for all. So the Fawcett expedition first sailed for Rio de Janeiro before trekking inland to the remote Amazonian outpost of Cuiabá, where they purchased pack animals and hired a pair of local guides. On April 20th, they ventured into the jungle for the first time. Ahead of them laid a sweltering maze of dense undergrowth, piranha-infested rivers, and unmapped territory. During the expedition's early weeks, however, it was the insects that proved the most pressing threat. Swarming mosquitoes and gnats made sleep difficult and travel miserable, and Rimmel's foot became severely swollen from tick bites. Undeterred though, Faucet set a demanding pace of between 10 to 15 miles per day. During one period of time, he got so far ahead of his young companions that he was forced to camp alone for a night. But on May 29th, the team reached the spot where Faucet had been forced to call it quits during one of his earlier searches. And there, they unloaded their equipment and sent their guides back to Cuiabá. Before the locals left though, Faucet handed over the last of the expedition's dispatches. Among them was a letter to his wife Nina, saying, "Jack is well and fit and getting stronger every day. You need to have no fear of any failure," and at that, the trio struck off into the bush alone. Faucet had warned that his expedition would go dark once it entered, uncharted territory, but by 1927, nearly 2 years had passed with no word from the colonel or his young companions. Newspapers that had previously hailed Faucet as being impervious to the perils of the jungle began speculating that he might have passed, and witnesses surfaced with bewildering rumors about his whereabouts. One man claimed Faucet was now living in the jungle, another that he was being held prisoner by locals. Still another maintained that he had become chief of a tribe of people eaters along the river. In 1928, the Royal Geographical Society's George Miller Diet launched the first ever expedition to search for Faucet and his party. He emerged from the jungle convinced that the expedition had perished, but he had no hard evidence and was unable to locate any bodies. In the years since that expedition, the mystery surrounding Faucet's disappearance has lured scores of other would-be rescuers and investigators into the Amazon. It's estimated as many as 100 of them have died in the jungle, and a few have followed in the explorers' footsteps by vanishing without a trace. As recently as 1996, a team of hunters led by a wealthy businessman named James Lynch was captured by Amazonian folks and held for ransom. They only escaped with their lives after giving up around $30,000 worth of equipment. Researchers have blamed its disappearance on everything from malaria and parasitic infection to starvation, drowning, and jaguar attacks. Some have even argued that Faucet's long-time dabbling in mysticism led him to vanish on purpose and set up an occult commune in the jungle. Now, his fate may never be known for sure, but in recent years, evidence has shown that his theory about a sophisticated jungle city was not a total fantasy. Excavations have revealed the ruins of garden cities with defensive walls, complex road networks, and enough space for thousands of inhabitants. Number 1. Everett Ru. So Everett was quite the fellow, and starting in 1931, he traveled by horse and donkey through Arizona, New Mexico, Utah, and Colorado, exploring the high desert of the Colorado Plateau. He rode broncos, branded calves, and investigated cliff dwellings. He also explored Sequoia and Yosemite National Parks, as well as the High Sierra in the summers of 1930 and 1933. In 1934, he worked with the University of California archaeologists near Kayenta, took part in a Hopi religious ceremony, and learned to speak Navajo. On November 20th of 1934, he settled alone into the Utah desert, taking 2 donkeys as pack animals, and was never seen again. Now, earlier that year, he had told his parents he would be unreachable for nearly 2 months, but about 3 months after his last correspondence, they started receiving their son's uncalled for mail. They wrote a letter to the post office of Escalante, Utah on February 7th of 1935, and a commissioner of Garfield County saw the letter and decided to form a search party with other men in the area. Now, his donkeys were found near the north side of Davis Gulch, which is a canyon of the Escalante River. The only sign of the man himself, though, was a corral he had made at his campsite in Davis Gulch, as well as an inscription the search party had found nearby with the words Nemo 1934. The discovery of the donkeys and the inscription to his parents was written in a letter dated March 8th of 1935. On March 15th, after completing a last attempt to find him in the plateau, an end to the search was called. Some believe this man may have fallen off a cliff or drowned in a flash flood. Others suspect he might have been killed. There have been false discoveries claiming to be the remains, but to date, nobody knows what happened to him. So in May of the year 2000, New York-based travel writers Claudia Kirschlock and Tanya Grossinger were traveling to Havana, Cuba on a business trip, but found the trip suddenly canceled during their layover in Jamaica. Now, while disappointed, they were determined to make the most of it. So at a resort, Claudia made friends with Anthony Grant, one of the resort's bartenders, and she was a big fan of reggae music, and Anthony reportedly offered to take her to a nearby club to just have some fun. Now, Tanya managed to book a flight home and agreed to meet up with Claudia when they were both back in New York City. Now, a lifeguard was reportedly the last person to see Claudia alive the next afternoon, when she was walking on a local beach away from the resort. Now, on June 2nd, her parents were notified because she hadn't shown up for work in New York, so they contacted the resort in Jamaica. Now, by this point, hotel maids had reported Claudia missing after noticing she had not slept in her bed for several days, but all of her belongings were still in her room. I'm talking her passport, credit cards, cell phone, almost $200 in cash were recovered from the hotel safe where she had left them. Now, Claudia's mom Mary told the press that she was a very organized person. She would have brought her belongings with her had she planned any sort of excursion or variance in her trip. So as soon as they found out their daughter was missing, Claudia's parents were on the next plane. But their attempts to find out what happened to their daughter hit one dead end after another, all beginning at the resort where she had been staying. So as a security precaution, the license plates of all vehicles entering and leaving the resort are carefully logged in a logbook, which is great. But oh so conveniently, the logbook for the month that Claudia disappeared was missing. Then a videotape from a surveillance camera mounted near her room had been recorded over. Finally, the room where she stayed was cleared by housekeeping and security before it could be processed for clues. Well, that's a lot of quinky-dinks.
There was no coinky-dink.
Little sus. Now, frustrated by the progress of the investigation, Claudia's parents brought in the FBI and an American search and rescue team. And according to a canine handler on the case, his dog tracked her scent to the home of Anthony Grant, that bartender that I mentioned a moment ago. At Anthony's home, the dog got a hit on a pair of boots, a pair of gloves, and a weapon. Oh, and it found Claudia's scent in the trunk and back seat of Anthony's car. Now, Anthony was investigated and polygraphed, but the results were inconclusive. And the FBI stated they interviewed him for several weeks, but they didn't consider him a suspect. Now, the family has struggled to keep the search for Claudia alive, despite dwindling leads, diminishing support, but there's still a $50,000 reward for answers. I'm just hoping they get answers someday. In third place, time to visit Australian bushland. So I'll be the first to admit that I know very little about Australia other than it's full of creatures that would kill me, very warm, and where my celebrity crush was born. Ricky Lee Mitchell, age 38, went missing from a rest stop at Reed River between Townsville and Chargers Towers on May 2nd. Detective Inspector Jason Shepard said she and her partner had stopped at the rest area on the afternoon of May 2nd for a swim. The partner then went to visit a friend nearby, leaving her behind for another swim and walk. When he returned, she could not be found. It's believed she walked off in the wrong direction to find her partner and got lost in her wanderings in the confusing terrain. Oof. Police and SES volunteers launched a land and air search of the area surrounding the Flinders Highway on the Friday, and homicide detectives were called in. She was found on Wednesday morning by a property owner, just a half an hour before a scheduled police press conference at the search site. Detective Shepard said he was elated the mother of four had survived, and was just completely ecstatic about the outcome. In a statement, he said that the longer the search went, the less optimistic he was, that he was concerned from the very start, but he's especially concerned after 7 days when people haven't been found, deeming finding Ricky a complete miracle. The poor woman spent more than a week lost in the challenging terrain. Detective Shepard said she survived by drinking water from puddles, and while she was obviously taken to hospital, she didn't appear to have suffered any serious injuries. Ricky's body was covered in scratches, her feet in particular were cut open and gushing red from the roughness she endured. I've been informed it's common knowledge that if you're out in the bush in the heat with a little food and water, that you can become disoriented quite quickly, which makes sense to me. Am I forgetting anything? Oh, right, how she was found. My bad. Blame my exhaustion. Ricky said that over the 8 days of her disappearance, she just kept walking and walking and walking and walking. And that morning in particular, she got to a point where she was able to hear the traffic from the Flinders Highway. She commandeered an all-terrain buggy that she discovered on a property she stumbled on, and eventually found another man who was able to drive her to meet authorities at the search party's command post. About 20 volunteers and police officers had been involved in the search for Ricky each day. Townsville group leader Greg Maloney said crews had found footprints and signs of life in the bushland during their hunt, but were unable to find the missing woman until she, found herself. On many occasions, they did find footprints and followed them down, but they didn't lead the rescuers to anything significant. Seeing as the area was a rest area, a lot of travelers moved through the region, making the evidence kind of murky and muddled. Thankfully, somehow, Ricky was able to rescue herself and has since been reunited with her family. In second place, we have someone who was almost burned alive. Lelle Jordan had reported being stalked to Cleveland police at least 3 times before she went missing on Saturday, May 6th. Specifically on May 4th, she told the police that Michael Stennett was watching her from his vehicle when she left her Fairport Avenue home that morning. As a result, Michael was charged with 1 felony count of menacing by stalking and 1 felony count of violating a protection order while committing a felony. Lelle was supposed to appear at a pretrial hearing on Monday, May 8th in connection with another criminal case involving Michael. So, to be specific, Michael was charged with 2 counts of forceful fornication and 1 count of abduction in May of 2022. Lelle also reported being stalked by a female friend of Michael's back on April 26th. She said the woman showed up while she was responding to a call, and Lelle then filed another police report on the same day. She said the woman was following her on the freeway as she was leaving work and tried to run her off the road until she pulled into the 3rd District Precinct. She said the woman's motive was that she doesn't testify in Michael's ongoing case. Mind your own business, lady. The morning of May 6th, shots were fired at a window in the home that she resided in with her sister. Just after midnight on May 12th, surveillance video footage from the open pantry convenience store located on Euclid Avenue showed her in a white shirt walking in. The store clerk described her as, looking very nervous, very tired, as if someone had fought with her. The first words out of Lechelle's mouth were that someone had tried to kill her before she asked the clerk for a cell phone, and he said she called 911 for help. The clerk said that her shirt was ripped open and looked as if it had been burned. Dispatch audio revealed that Lechelle told first responders that she ran away from her kidnappers who tried to burn her alive. Authorities told the dispatcher, "You're not going to believe this. We just got a call from Lelle Jordan. She said that she ran away from the people that kidnapped her and they tried to burn her alive." Ay, ay, ay. She's not a witch.
Whoa, she turned me into a newt!
Her father, Joseph Jordan, told the press that Lechelle is talking with investigators about her case while under observation at a hospital. She is still expected to testify in that case I mentioned before involving Michael Stennett, who was arrested on charges of violating a protection order while committing a felony and menacing by stalking. Now, Lechelle has said that she is grateful for her Cleveland EMS colleagues and everyone else who searched for her, and that her family has visited her, including her 2 children. Thank goodness, but oh my gosh, police, help! I hope they've got her under protection. That's all I can say. In first place, we have Patricia Copta. Imagine going missing for 30 years. Your entire family and friends assume the worst, and it turns out you've just been wandering casually around another country? While I love the animated version of Anastasia, the reality isn't exactly something I'd wish on anyone I know. Patricia Copta, now 83, was last seen by her family in Pittsburgh in 1992, according to a missing persons flyer posted by the Pennsylvania Emergency Response Center. At the time, she was a well-known street preacher known as the Sparrow because of her slate build. Now, her husband Bob Copta reported her missing in 1992, noting it wasn't uncommon for his wife to leave for short periods of time, but that time turned into more than just a missing weekend. He described the initial disappearance as one night, when he arrived home to find her missing, no one knew where she had gone, and zilch in terms of finding her. U.S. police eventually learned the story of what happened to Patricia after being contacted by an Interpol agent and a social worker from Puerto Rico who cared for her. Patricia entered their care in 1999 when she was found in need in the streets of, Puerto Rico. Through the years that Patricia remained at the care home, she refused to share details about her private life and where she came from. But as her age and dementia progressed, she began to share rare snippets about her past. Just a tidbit here and there. By last year, a social worker at the home had enough information to alert authorities back in the States about the now 83-year-old woman. A DNA test has confirmed her identity. Before her disappearance, Patricia was at a facility in Pennsylvania briefly after doctors diagnosed her with delusions of grandeur and said she had signs of schizophrenia. She was released and kept preaching until she disappeared, with her family now believing she feared being further institutionalized and, decided to flee the country instead. No biggie, right? We've all thought about running away. Now, before Patricia was married, she would vacation often in Puerto Rico with her friends, and according to her sister Gloria, who described her as loving the ocean, the beach, and the sunshine. Years went by, no sign of her. Now Bob, who had been married to Patricia for 20 years, obtained a death declaration about 7 years after her disappearance. The poor man spent so many years on edge, wondering if Patricia was every unidentified body found reported. Meanwhile, Patricia was apparently wandering the island's north towns of Naranjito, Corozo, and Toa Alta, located just southwest of the capital of San Juan. When she was first taken in at the adult home, she had hinted that she had arrived in Puerto Rico via a cruise ship from Europe. After a social worker contacted the police in Pennsylvania, it took almost a year for DNA samples to confirm that the woman was, indeed, Patricia. So Bob, who did not remarry, said he doesn't plan to visit, and that he's now trying to forget the past, though he's glad to know she's being taken care of. I don't blame the guy, that's a lot to go through.
The Black Forest in Germany. A photograph purportedly showing Germany's Black Forest is frequently circulated on social media, along with the claim that the wooded area caused 15,000 missing persons cases last year. While some people have challenged the picture and said it's fake news, others have openly discussed the topic and argued that there may be a lot of truth to it because it's been alleged that an unusually high number of people have in fact gone missing there. The Black Forest in Germany is known for its dense woodlands, picturesque landscapes, and folklore, but it has also been associated with various disappearances over the years that have basically turned into cold cases. While some stories and legends highlight mysterious cases, the region is not particularly notorious for ongoing disappearances. Now, most reported cases are often related to hiking accidents, lost individuals, or people who have chosen to go off the grid. The forest's vastness and, rugged terrain can make it easy for people to just become disoriented or lost. Additionally, the area has a very high, rich history of myths and legends, which can sometimes exaggerate the perception of danger or mystery. One particular case of a missing person is that of a woman woman named Scarlett. Scarlett was a student at Bad Lippensprungen, which is North Rhine-Westphalia, who traveled to the Black Forest area on September 4th, 2020 to go on a 74-mile hike. She's very slim, long blonde hair, and was wearing a red backpack, very noticeable. Now the hike along there is obviously done in multiple stages. Scarlett had successfully completed the first 5 out of 6 stages when she disappeared and had spent the night at a hotel. Now the town, that marks the starting point of the last stage of the hike. This last confirmed sighting of her was at 10:10 a.m. on the 10th of September. Scarlett was filmed by surveillance cameras while shopping at a supermarket. Now she also sent a text message through WhatsApp to her family. It is not known, if she actually, started the planned stage of the hike that day, since her phone was last located in Totmos. Now, what's unusual about this last sighting is that there are witnesses for the other days and stages of her hike, but not for this one. Police, family members, volunteers search extensively for Scarlett using drones, helicopters, and man trailers, but nothing has been found. No traces of an accident, any of her equipment or supplies, just nothing. The police are still looking for witnesses, but their main theory seems to be that some sort of accident happened. It has been said that the only way she hasn't been found if it was an accident, so would be, if Scarlett left the main path as well. Yosemite National Park. Some people are born for the outdoors, and Michael Fiercery was one of them. This man pushed aside a conventional lifestyle to live one of adventure and exploration. In 2005, he decided to take a hike solo through Yosemite National Park, and not just the touristy areas, of Yosemite either, but the parts reserved for the very hardcore adventures. Michael was very independent and liked to live off the grid, so it wasn't until, his wilderness permit expired that people realized something was terribly wrong. A massive search was instigated basically, and even involved the Marines. Now they quickly found Michael's backpack, which spelled very bad news and greatly concerned his family, of course. Unfortunately, no other trace of Michael has ever been found. This park is responsible for a lot of people having gone missing. One person on Reddit shared their experience and said on their first trip there, they were hiking up to the mist trail with a crowd in the morning. Someone started taking pictures of something on the hill on the left side of the path, not the side with the view. So naturally, everyone passing stopped and started looking. Just above the path was a baby bear, just vibing, walking around, super cute. It eventually started walking back up the hill, and that's when the weird thing happened. 2 boys, probably around 10 or 11 years old, just started walking up the hill after the bear. Now off the path into the bush, no parent yelling after them, no one was with them, not even a parent standing around, that spot on the path, like asking if anyone saw where their kids went. No idea what became of this. The person jokingly said, hopefully the mama bear, took them in as one of their own, and they now live as bears, but the best possible income would be that. So it's not just unexplained disappearances that happen there, but other weird, unexplainable things as well.
In the year 1980, 28-year-old John Reed left his hometown of Twin Cities, California, and traveled to Brazil. He was hoping to find the lost city of Akor, an ancient underground civilization which had supposedly remained undiscovered in the Amazonian jungles for thousands of years. Now, he had learned about the city in a book. Now, the author of said book, Carl Brugger, had written it after learning about Akor from a Brazilian jungle guy named Tatunka Nara, who claimed he had once been chief of a tribe which ruled the city 3,000 years prior. He said he was born in the jungle near the border with Peru, and he actually served as a guide for an elaborate expedition mounted by Jacques Cousteau. Yeah, the famous French explorer scientist. Guy's lived a couple of lifetimes. Now, Tatunka lived in the village of Barcelos and ran a lucrative business leading tourists into the jungle to search for the missing city. Few who went in the wilds with Tatunka actually believe the story of Akor. It merely just added another layer of, fun to the adventure of a lifetime. But for folks like John, the tale touched deeper chords, and he decided to accompany Tatunka on one of these expeditions. He left his dog tags and return plane ticket in his hotel room, but never came back. Now, Tatunka always claimed that he ran off and hid in the jungle after they decided to return to the city. However, Reed was not the only person to disappear under suspicious circumstances in Tatunka's company. During the 1980s, a Swiss man named Herbert Werner and a Swedish woman named Christine Huser would also mysteriously vanish during an expedition. All we found was Herbert's jawbone. In addition, Carl Brugger would meet his end too soon on a Rio street in 1984, and authorities have always believed that Gunther Hook was responsible for his killing and 3 disappearances, but there's never been enough evidence to charge him. Oh right, I'm getting ahead of myself here. You have no idea who Gunther is. Well, it was actually revealed that Tatunka was a German citizen named Gunther. The police have his birth certificate and other personal records, and they studied photographs of him, old photographs, and they're like, yeah, that's you. Police records show that Gunther was a sailor on a West German freighter in 1966 when he jumped ship in Venezuela, and arrested, he claimed to be an Indian. Now, a psychiatrist diagnosed him as schizophrenic, and then he was returned to West Germany, where he was jailed for 3 months for failing to support his wife and 2 sons. Now, 3 years later, Gunther sailed to Brazil and again jumped ship, according to the police, and this time, well, he disappeared, and miraculously, the Duncanara emerged. So going back to John, poor guy, his sister Sandy actually traveled to the Amazon around 1990 with a German filmmaker and a Times reporter to try and get some answers for herself about his disappearance. But they got nothing, and it's still unknown to this day. In 1997, Judy Smith was a 50-year-old mother of 2 from Newton, Massachusetts. She had recently gotten married to her attorney husband, Jeffrey, and decided to fly to Philadelphia to join him on a business trip. So I believe it was April 10th. Jeffrey was attending a conference, so Judy was like, I'll go sightseeing in the city. I'll have fun. Well, she never returned to the hotel that night, so obviously Jeffrey's gonna report her missing, and it would be about 5 months before, well, they found her, kind of. On September 7th, hikers came across her decomposed, partially buried remains in an isolated mountain area. But here's the thing, here's why it's baffling. Judy's remains were found over 960 kilometers away in North Carolina, and nobody knows what happened to her. So authorities concluded that she was likely a victim of foul play, but since she still had her wedding ring, $167 in her possession, robbery wasn't a motive. And even though she normally carried her belongings in a red backpack, a blue one was found at the scene. And to make things even stranger, there were indications that Judy had traveled to the area voluntarily, seeing as 4 witnesses had seen her in nearby areas. All indications pointed to Judy being in a friendly mood, and a witness who spoke with her said she mentioned her husband was an attorney. So if the woman that witnesses spoke to was indeed Judy Smith, no one knows why she felt compelled to run off without telling her family. And if she chose to disappear on her own, how did she wind up on a remote mountain? So even though he was 86 years old at the time, Leo Whitaker still lived a very active life. He had been married to his wife Virginia for 55 years. They both belonged to a Christian organization called Maranatha Volunteers International, and by 2001, the Whitakers had worked with Maranatha on 40 humanitarian trips. For their 41st trip, the couple left their home in North Dakota to accompany the organization to Tabacon Hot Springs in Costa Rica. So on November 8th, Leo rested on a bench while his wife went off to wade in the hot springs. And when Virginia returned about a half an hour later, her husband was gone. It's theorized that Leo may have fallen asleep on the bench and become disoriented after waking up, but before he disappeared, Leo had been seen asking people if they knew where his wife was. He walked to the resort gate, asked the guards if it was okay to leave, so they opened the gate and watched him walk off down the main road. Only 15 minutes later, one of Leo's friends drove that same stretch of road for 10 straight miles, but didn't see any sign of him. Since Leo didn't move very fast, there were really only a few places he could have gone, so the only logical explanation was that someone might have picked him up. However, an extensive search of the area turned up no trace of Leo, and he's never been found. And finally for today, on September 29th of 2011, 29-year-old Cameron Remer left his home in California for a business trip to San Francisco and checked into the Fairmont Hotel with plans to remain in the city for a month in hopes of expanding his medical MJ business. Now, on the evening of October 6th, one of his buddies in Arizona received a strange phone call from him, asking for money to pay for a room. And when the friend agreed to the request, Cameron suddenly changed his mind, said he found a place to stay. Turns out Cameron was drinking heavily at the Fairmont that night, and the hotel was like, yeah, get the heck out of here. But before he left, Cameron checked his bags with the hotel, claimed he would return to pick them up later. And he stayed true to his word, returning 3 days later, incoherent and very disoriented, wearing a completely different shoe on each foot. Now, he was able to get into his former room without retrieving his bags, and that was the last anybody ever saw of him. After Cameron was reported missing, his bags were finally opened to reveal over 60 vials of MJ, along with $30,000 in cash. Now, there have since been numerous unconfirmed sightings of a disheveled Cameron wandering around San Francisco, leading to speculation that he suffered a bit of a break and is now a homeless transient. But I wonder, could his disappearance be connected to the large quantity of fun stuff and cash he had with him? Until he's found, we're never gonna know. It's not unusual that people disappear, but the vanishing of Kenny Veach is truly bizarre. There are several strange aspects about his case, and it's impossible to say what really happened. What did Kenny see and feel when he entered this mysterious cave in the Nevada desert? Well, according to himself, he said shortly before he vanished, there were some supernatural forces in this cave. Now, Kenny was a man who loved hiking and disappeared on Monday, November 10th of 2014. So about 10 years ago. He told his family he was going on a short overnight trip into the Sheep Mountains in Nevada. Now, sadly, that wasn't the case, or else it wouldn't be newsworthy and we wouldn't be talking about it today. 1 month earlier, he had discovered a very strange cave in the Mojave Desert. He said the cave evoked a strange, possibly supernatural occurrence within him, and he needed to explore it. Kenny wanted to show the world the unusual cave he had discovered, but he did not return home from his trip and was never seen again. Before his disappearance, Kenny commented on a YouTube video claiming claimed to have found a cave around Nellis Air Force Base. So this is in southern Nevada. Now, Kenny was a brave explorer. He entered every cave he came across, but this one in particular actually frightened him. To quote directly, he commented, "I am a long-distance hiker, and one time during one of my hikes out by Nellis Air Force Base, I found a hidden cave. The entrance to the cave was shaped like a perfect capital M. I always enter every cave I find, but as I began to enter this particular cave, my whole body began to vibrate. The closer I got to the cave entrance, the worse the vibrating became. Suddenly, I became very scared and hightailed it out of there. That was one of the strangest things that ever happened to me." So Kenny vowed to return to the cave, bringing a camera and a weapon with him, and did wind up making a video showing himself looking for the cave, and he posted it to YouTube. But the desert is large and it's impossible to locate the cave based on this video. What happened next? But a mystery. All we know is Kenny returned to the site a month later to find the cave and was never seen or heard from again. The only thing we do know is that a search party was formed by Nevada rescue volunteers, and they found his cell phone near an abandoned mine shaft a week after his disappearance, but there were no traces of Kenny. We're talking no body, no clothes, no other belongings have ever been found. Now, this dangerous cave has not been located, and Kenny seems to have vanished into thin air. This next clip is from an unknown explorer in the Paris Catacombs. For those who do not know, even though Paris is in the news right now, these are a series of underground tunnels that are located underneath the city that were created during the late 18th century to help alleviate the city's cemetery shortage crisis. Yeah, fun fact folks, there's approximately 6 million bodies buried down here just as is. Now, in recent times, it is a popular place for urban explorers. They call themselves cataphiles. And one example of this crazy urbanness is a man who took footage of the catacombs sometime in the early 1990s. Now, we have a snippet for you to watch. And this footage, which was taken on a black and white video recorder, starts rather unremarkably. This guy's just exploring, having a good time. He even picks up a couple of bones along the way. But as the video goes on, he begins to walk at a faster pace. Then he breaks into a run, and then drops the camera before running off into the darkness. The camera lands in a puddle on its side, and that's where it stayed, and it filmed the man's feet running away. The point of view footage became disorienting as this guy's running. He's swinging from tunnel to tunnel, and it kind of reflects his confusion about like, where do I go? How do I get out of here? What do I do? So after this, the footage was found by a different group of folks in one of the deepest areas out of the catacombs, before being acquired by a documentarian by the name of Francis Friedland. He later presented the footage on the second episode of the ABC Family show, Scariest Places on Earth, in the year 2000. Nobody has stepped up to claim the footage after the initial airing of the episode, and that includes Friedland. Nobody knows what happened to the man in the video, or who he was to this day. Riley Strain, a University of Missouri student whose body was recovered from a river after going missing in Tennessee's capital for nearly 2 weeks, sadly passed away from accidental submerging of water and intoxication. Video released by the police showed the missing Riley briefly speaking with a police officer on the night he vanished in Nashville, Tennessee. So Officer Reginald Young came across Strain. He was, 22, while responding to a car burglary on Gay Street, south of the Woodland Street Bridge on the night of March 8th, according to the Nashville police. So around 9:50 p.m., Strain walked by alone. The officer was like, "How's it going?" Strain responded, "I'm good, how are you?" But there's no other video showing that Riley went anywhere away from Gay Street after this time frame. Well, that's what the police said when they released the footage. So Strain disappeared on the night of March 8th after a night of imbibing in Nashville's Broadway area, according to the police. The university senior was visiting Nashville with his Delta Chi fraternity brothers for their formal, according to his family. Now, there's other video from the police from 9:47 showing Strain crossing the street with the group, checking his phone. He then stopped and changed directions for a moment before proceeding down the street with the group. And we've got surveillance footage showing him walking alone, stumbling down the street, and then an additional angle shows him running and falling down. Now, his body is claimed to have last seen him when he was kicked out of Luke Bryan's bar, Luke's 32 Bridge. Well, that's what they told the cops. And then his bank card was found on the embankment between Gay Street and the Cumberland River near Riverfront Park. And there's no evidence of foul play, but we still don't know exactly what happened.
Grand Canyon National Park. This national park is a vast mile-deep canyon carved by the Colorado River over millions of years, showcasing a unique geological history and diverse ecosystems in northwestern Arizona. The canyon's formation began approximately 6 million years ago, with the Colorado River carving its way through the Colorado Plateau. Now, the canyon is up to 18 miles wide and 6,000 feet deep in some places. At the time of this disappearance, Morgan Heimer was working for a rafting company company called Tour West, which provided guided tours through the Grand Canyon. On day 6 of an 8-day trip, Heimer vanished in the Pumpkin Springs area of the park. The lead guide was speaking to Heimer when he was distracted by a client. When he went to speak to Heimer again, the young man was just gone. The guide didn't think much of it at first, believing Heimer had simply just wandered off, but when 3 hours had gone by without a word, Heimer was officially declared missing. An extensive search lasting 6 days was carried out, but to no avail. Great Smoky Mountains National Park. One of the most famous missing person stories involving a forest is the disappearance of Dennis Lloyd Martin in the Great Smoky Mountains National Park in 1969. Now, Dennis Lloyd Martin, a 6-year-old boy, vanished on June 14th, 1969, while on a family outing at Spence Field in the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. Martin disappeared on June 14th while surprising his adults with actually his brother and other children from a separate family the Martins were camping with. He was last seen by his father going behind a bush to hide, intending on surprising the adults with the other children. Now, after not seeing him for about 5 minutes, and when all of the other children had returned to the campsite, his father became concerned and began searching for him. His father ran down the trail for nearly 2 miles until he was sure he could not have gotten any farther. Now, after several hours, they sought help from National Park Service rangers, and the search effort was extensive, involving approximately 1,400 searchers and covering a 56 square mile area, but no trace of Dennis was ever found. The disappearance does remain a cold case, with the National Park Service still investigating to this day. Green Mountain National Forest. The Green Mountain National Forest, or GMNF, is the only federally managed national forest in Vermont, encompassing over 400,000 acres in southwestern and central Vermont, offering very diverse landscapes, wildlife, and recreation opportunities. Now, the Vermont State Police exists because of Paula Jean Weldon. Weldon was an 18-year-old college student who decided to walk the long trail in Vermont. Weldon hitchhiked from school to the trail, and when she failed to return for her studies, her roommate notified the administrators. They in turn, contacted the authorities, and a massive search for Weldon was undertaken. It involved the National Guard, firefighters, and even students from the school, which had closed to help in the search. But despite the extensiveness, nothing came of it, and the resulting investigation was fiercely criticized for being shoddy. Just 7 months later, the Vermont State Police was created to prevent such poorly run investigations in the future. Paula Jean was never found. Her family is still searching for answers. The community still wants to know what happened, and sadly, I don't think anyone ever will know. This is not the first and only case, though. It's been reported that this forest is responsible for the disappearance of upwards of 20 plus people within the last 20 years alone. Ozark Francis National Forest in Arkansas. Many of the biggest national park disappearances start the same way. A family or group visits a national park, one member wanders, and no trace of them is ever found. It's an unsettling pattern that has led to many, of the monster stories that surround these national parks. It's also exactly what the poor Van Els family experienced on a summer day in Ozark St. Francis National Park in 1946. 8-year-old Katherine Van Els was playing with her siblings in the woods near her campsite. The brothers looked away for just a moment, and suddenly she was just gone. While many national park mysteries are there, or end there, should I say, Katherine's story somehow gets stranger. A huge search was launched, combing every mile of the forest. 6 days after her disappearance, volunteers wandered by a cave 30 miles from where Katherine went missing. Out crawled little Katherine, who casually just waved and said, "Here I am." Katherine had very little memory of the last 6 days, mentioning she ate berries and drank water from the cave. She made very odd remarks about sleeping in warm grass and finding herself in the cave, and always seemed very, calm about the whole ordeal, which was weird. Search and rescue teams were equally as confused. They had searched the exact area with equipment and dogs twice. Why had Katherine not been found on either of those previous sweeps? As strange as the circumstances are, the Van Els family got a rare happy ending to their national park missing persons case.
Human remains discovered in a wastewater collection point last month were identified as missing Texas college student Caleb Harris. Now, the 21-year-old was last seen in the early hours of March 4th, earlier this year, after he's walked his dog at about 3 a.m. His father said that he returned home with the dog, then left again, and that's where the story ends. A doorbell camera at a nearby apartment did capture him, his buddy, and one of his roommates in a parking lot playing with the puppy, which belonged to the girlfriend of one of his roommates. And then he went home, he and his buddies played online video games for over an hour with another friend, and then, after that, he went out. The second of Harris's roommates said, oh, he's going to bed. He was gonna stay up late, order some snacks from Uber Eats because he didn't have anything for lunch, and he did send a Snapchat to his younger sister that showed him walking the puppy, and then he sent a Snapchat photo to a high school buddy, and the photo showed a small bridge over a drainage ditch on the 1900 block of Ennis Jocelyn, which was within a few hundred feet of the entrance to the apartment complex where he lived. But that's when the cell phone shared its last location, and it wasn't turned on since. Now, the Uber Eats driver delivered the order to the apartment, left it outside, and went his merry way. Well, around 11 a.m., one of Harris's roommates discovered that Uber Eats order outside the front door, and Harris's pickup was still there. And his wallet and his keys were in his apartment, but nobody could find him or his cell phone. Now, his roommates described him as a homebody, creature of habit. So they called the police. They're like, we don't know what's going on. We tried looking for a buddy. We can't find him. So a preliminary search of the apartment complex and the immediate area surrounding it, there was no signs of a struggle, no signs of violence, no indication of a hit and run, nothing. Apparently, weapons, fishing gear, all the stuff that belonged to Harris that could be maybe something, were all found. They found his laptop, they turned it over to the police, that didn't do anything. It wasn't until June that city water employees doing maintenance in the area discovered human remains in a wastewater collection well, and they were too decomposed to identify, but then a month later, after a lot of testing, turns out it was Harris. But we still don't know what happened. And finally today, relatives of the California woman who vanished during a yoga retreat in Guatemala released a haunting last video of her paddling from the shore in a kayak, while challenging local authorities to believe she then passed in the water. Nancy Ng of Monterey Park was seen smiling and waving from a kayak on October 19th, shortly before she disappeared while staying near Lake Atlan, as seen in the footage shared with Good Morning America. Now, the prosecutor's office said that a woman with Nancy told authorities that they were about 2 kilometers deeper into the lake, and Nancy was like, I want to go for a swim. And that's all we know. Now, the prosecutors were like, that's when she goes under, because apparently rescuers found her empty kayak. But Nancy's family refuses to believe that simple explanation. They claim it took more than 24 hours for her disappearance to be reported, and there's still folks that they think have not come forward. Fire and rescue officials told news outlets that there were reports that Nancy was last seen but a half mile from shore, but once again, her kayak was found empty. So the FBI did offer resources to help in the search, and then you also had the US State Department monitoring the investigation, well in touch with Guatemalan officials. According to Nancy's sister, her dad keeps his phone next to him at night because he's hoping for a ransom call, something that will prove that Nancy might still be alive and she's out there. Now, the family has also hired a private search team, and I wish them luck.
Coming in at number 5, we've got the Springfield III, and no, we are not talking about Mo, Lenny, and Carl, although I'm sure they've disappeared mysteriously from time to time. We're talking about the real-life Springfield and 3 people that seemingly had nowhere to disappear to. Back in June of 1992, students in Springfield, Missouri were celebrating their high school graduation. Kickapoo High School had just watched its graduating class toss their hats and jump for joy. The world was opening up for these teenagers. However, for 2 students, and even more remarkably one of their mothers, this was actually the end of the line. Or was it? Plenty of parties were being thrown to commemorate the end of the high school experience. Susie Streeter and Stacy McCall were hopping between parties, soaking in the celebratory atmosphere, listening to whatever jock rock was popular in the 90s, living life. But when the night seemed to be drawing to a close, the duo decided it was best to head home. They had originally planned on staying at one house, but deemed it too packed to comfortably crash in, so they went back to Susie's house. At the time, Susie lived there with her mother, Cheryl Levin. So the 2 girls went home, and that was the last their friends ever saw of them. Assuming all went well, some pals swung by Susie's house the next day to pick up the girls for a trip to the water park. But there was to be no sliding and splashing that day, no. The friends arrived at the house, but nobody seemed to be home. Strangers still, the front door was unlocked and a porch light was broken. The house was largely untouched too, with stuff like cars, keys, cigarettes, and purses all still present. So the 2 graduates made it home and unpacked for sure, and the mother was likely still in the house that previous night. Even the dog was still at home, wandering around. But to this day, nobody is sure what happened to the women. Apparently there was a mysterious message left on the answering machine, but this was deleted somehow before anyone could record it. Anonymous, obscene phone calls were apparently quite common at the time, but could this have been one with more meaning? We might never know. Coming in at number 4, the Sarah Joe. Let this be a lesson to all ye landlubbers. Be careful while out on the water. You never know what might happen. Back in the late 70s, a group of pals decided to have a fun time out on the coast of Maui. Fishing, chatting, and general merriment was on the docket. Disappearing into a storm and washing up years later, not part of the plan. But then again, when do things go exactly as planned? 5 friends boarded the small fishing boat, the Sarah Joe, and made their way out onto the water. What they didn't see coming was an enormous tropical storm. Should have checked the weather, eh? They never returned, sparking a massive search and rescue effort. However, the rescuers came up empty-handed. Unfortunate, but not uncommon when it comes to small boats entering big storms. However, that was just the beginning of the mystery. 10 years passed and nobody found anything else related to the Sarah Joe. But then, all of a sudden, the boat was found, washed up on one of the Marshall Islands between Hawaii and the Philippines. A decade had gone by with no sign of the boat, but here it was. However, the boat wasn't a coffin full of unfortunate sailors as one might morbidly expect. In fact, 4 of the 5 still friends are still accounted for, but there was one man who was found, but just not in a way anybody expected. Next to the shipwreck was a grave, and buried in that grave was one of the men. But then who buried him? And where did they go? And why didn't they report what happened? At this point, I don't think we're getting any satisfying answers.
Number 3. At an alien. I think this might be a fantasy for some of us. I know if you grew up with Halo, maybe this, seemed like a lifestyle. But take a listen to this next wild point when someone thinks they might have at an alien. Listen. A few months ago, I started having really weird dreams in which I was in a place I did not know, and I remember being really afraid. I kept it to myself for the longest time until I started noticing that I had bruising that I couldn't explain. They started on my arms and legs and then moved to my back. Most of them looked like perfect circles, like someone had poked me hard enough with an unsharpened pencil. The dreams kept coming and I started having really bad headaches. After a few weeks after the first dream, I started noticing bruising on my wife. Then one day I was in my bedroom and I noticed my pistol was out of place. I had one of those dreams the night before. So I took out the mag and I noticed there was a round missing. Now a little background here. I used to be a cop and I'm an NRA firearms instructor, so I am very familiar with firearms and I take great ensure that they are safe and ready. I asked my wife if she had touched the Glock and she said no. I took it apart and found what looked like powdered residue in the barrel. Now I started to freak out because someone had a pistol. After I found that it had been messed with, the dreams and the bruising stopped completely. I believe that my wife and I were being abducted. I further believe that it stopped after I tried to fight back and possibly at an alien in our house. I know it sounds odd, and I know I wouldn't believe it if someone else told me this story. It's part of the reason why I never tell anyone but a handful of close friends. Imagine, so you do it, you see an alien, you get abducted by one, you have this first contact moment. Not only that, but you shoot at an alien like you're Han Solo. You get to do the coolest thing any human being will ever do, and you're not even 100% sure if that happened. That is such a cruel twist of fate. Number 2, something impossible. Another one, guess from where? If you guessed Reddit, you're correct. Take a listen. I'm not sure what to think about this, but my friend who was in the car thinks it was an aliens. My friend and I were driving north from Kenosha, Wisconsin to his house about a half hour away. We had missed the on-ramp before, so we double checked that we're going the right way with my GPS. Now after a while, I notice a car has been tailgating me. I quickly matched the headlight pattern with that of an officer of the law, but my cruise control is set at the speed limit. After being nervous about this copper for about 5 minutes of following, he very suddenly changes lanes to our left and blasts past us to tailgate someone else a few lengths ahead. Now the cop freaked us out, but we were almost to our off-ramp, so we were looking for the sign, and then I see it. Welcome to Illinois. We didn't make any turns, we stayed on the freeway, and the section we were driving on didn't have any splits. There was absolutely no turning around, we were going north. But the freakiest part was I pulled over and started doing some Google Maps calculations. From the place we left, it took a half hour driving south to get to the Illinois border. And we had started off going farther away, but it had only been 20 minutes. The landmarks we had passed going north were also more than 20 minutes away. In the time that had passed, we shouldn't have been able to see the landmarks or to drive to Illinois, even if we would have started off going south. My friend who was with me thinks it was an alien encounter. They picked us up and wanted different humans for some reason, but when they put us back, they put us on the correct freeway, only in the wrong location, facing the wrong direction. After we calmed down from our brains melting, the exact same thing happened with that same cop. We had turned around and headed back north, gotten tailed for a few minutes, and then they suddenly changed lanes to the left and blasted the accelerator to get up on somebody's bumper. Aliens? Improbable travel through time and space? Reality checkpoints? I don't have any other way to explain it. Something impossible happened to us. Oh yeah, that kind of stuff happens all the time. That's just the code in the Matrix glitching out a little bit. They should have a patch ready for that next month. You won't even notice the difference. And finally, number 1. My mom tells a story of her and her friend. Let's call her Lisa. When my mom and Lisa were teenagers, they were up on the roof of Lisa's house and they see a bright light in the sky. Next thing they know, the light is gone. Thing is, they think they've been on the roof for 15 minutes, but something like 3 hours passed. Now, my mom doesn't exactly remember about what happened during that time, and Lisa simply refuses to talk about it. She would answer my mom with things like, oh, I don't know, and drop it. Now, you ever hear mom say drop it? Drop it. A couple months later, my mom moves away and loses contact with Lisa for a decade. They finally meet up, and immediately my mom notices that something odd is present about Lisa. She appears very distant, with a dreamy demeanor. After they talk for a bit, Lisa brings up the incident on the roof. My mom says she still doesn't really remember anything about it, but Lisa remembers. She remembers everything. She said that at first it was all in bits and pieces, and she couldn't remember any of it clearly. She was confused, scared, and wanted to avoid discussing it. Then, as time passed, she began to remember more of it. She remembers it all clearly, and she remembers the other 3 times she was abducted after that clearly as well. At first they paralyzed her somehow, and did all sorts of creepy experiments, but by the most recent time, no more probing, they were just talking to her. They didn't speak English or any other language, but she could understand everything they said. Apparently they told her all this stuff about space, Earth, and shockingly predicted things years beforehand, that she would get pregnant in a specific year, and it would be a stillborn, and that she would never have children again. They also told her that it was not their fault, and that they even made an attempt to save her from this, but they were unsuccessful. They said that they had abducted my mother another time after that first incident. Now my mom says she has no recollection of any other abductions, but she does have nightmares about being abducted, but she's almost sure that they're just that, nightmares. Anyway, Lisa tells my mom that every time she speaks with them, she comes to understand the divine truth more and more. When mom asks what that truth is, Lisa just says, "You'll know eventually." And she says that once she learned of the truth, everything became wonderful. Now my mom's seen her a few more times over the years, and she apparently is pretty normal. She doesn't obsess over alien stuff. She only ever brings it up in passing, so it's not a central part of her daily life. But you know, she did mention seeing the divine truth after being abducted several times, so I would say it's somewhat a part of her life.
Starting off this countdown, we have Connor and Sheila Dwire. On April 30th, 1991, married couple Connor and Sheila Dwire attended a funeral in their town of Fermoy in Ireland. After the service, the couple were seen on the steps of the church. That was the last time they were ever seen. It wasn't until 23 days later that they were reported missing, after Sheila's sister hadn't heard from them for quite some time. Here's where it gets strange. Inside their house was all of their personal belongings. Nothing was touched. Their passports were there, large sums of money, and jewelry, which rules out a robbery. The only thing missing were Connor, Sheila, the clothes that they were wearing that day, and their car. It's thought that maybe they drove off together. But no money was taken out of the bank. Bags weren't packed, and the house looked like it was awaiting their arrival. So what happened to them? Well, all we have are theories. One of the theories is that Connor was experiencing financial troubles, so he got involved in the drug trade. But a lot of people disagree with this theory. Theory 2 is that they crashed their car into the river Blackwater. I mean, a year before the Dwires disappeared, a man named William Fennessy also disappeared from Fermoy. In 2012, his body and car were found in the river. So it could be that the couple suffered the same terrible fate. To this day, this case remains one of Ireland's most baffling missing persons cases. Moving on to number 4, we have Michael Negreet. On December 10th, 1999, 18-year-old UCLA student Michael Negreet went missing. Apparently, he stayed up that morning playing video games in his friend's dorm until 4 o'clock in the morning. Michael then left to go to his own dorm. That was the last time he was ever seen. By 9 o'clock a.m., he was missing. Michael's roommate woke up at that time and saw that he was not in bed. All of his possessions had been left behind, like his keys and wallet. Even his shoes. Police dogs tracked Michael's scent to a bus stop a couple miles from campus. But it makes us wonder, why was he walking there with no shoes? And where was he going at that time and without his keys and wallet? Something is really fishy about this. The only lead the case got was a potential sighting of a man seen in Dykstra Hall at around 4:35 a.m., but no one knows if that was actually Michael or if it's even relevant to the case. Now, there are a couple of theories for this case as well. One of them is that Michael was experimenting with drugs and wandered off while on a trip. Another theory is that Michael was murdered and all of his friends helped to dispose of the body. And the last theory is that since a lot of construction was happening around the school, Michael fell into a construction pit and died.
In third place, time to visit the Cecil Hotel. Yes, I know, I've talked about this before, because it's just got such a terrifyingly fascinating history. So many lives have met their end there, and it's actually undergone an attempted rebrand in recent years to try and change the reputation it holds, with no luck. Canadian tourist Alisa Lamb was enjoying a lovely vacation to Los Angeles in the beginning of 2013, having chosen to stay in the Cecil Hotel for its reasonable pricing, while she took in the sights, including a trip to the San Diego Zoo and a taping of Conan, all of which she documented on social media. Alisa was initially assigned a shared room on the hotel's 5th floor, but her roommates complained about odd behavior and she was moved to a room of her own after just 2 days. According to Amy Price, the manager of the Cecil Hotel, at the time of Alisa's disappearance, she was leaving notes for her roommates that said, "Go home" and "Go away," and would lock the door to the room and require a password for entry. Alisa contacted her parents in British Columbia daily while traveling, up until the day she disappeared. On January 31st of 2013, the day she was scheduled to, check out of the Cecil, her parents didn't hear from her and called the Los Angeles Police Department and made the decision to fly to LA themselves. Katie Orphan, manager of the last bookstore, was the only person who recalled seeing her that day, describing her as outgoing, lively, and very friendly while purchasing gifts to bring home to her family. Kate recalled a conversation they had shared about how heavy certain books would be to carry around for a day. Police searched the hotel to the extent that they legally could. They searched Alisa's room and had dogs go through the building, including the rooftop, but the dogs were unsuccessful in detecting her scent. Since the police didn't have probable cause, that any sort of crime had been committed, they didn't search every room. On February 6th, a week after Alisa had last been seen, the LAPD finally decided more help was needed. Go figure. Flyers with her image were posted in the neighborhood and online. Interest in her disappearance increased on February 13th when the LAPD released security camera footage of her behaving erratically in a hotel elevator on the day she was last seen alive, with the footage going viral. During this search for our lovely missing girl, guests at the hotel began complaining about low water pressure, with some claiming their water was black in color and had an unusual taste. On the morning of February 19th, Santiago Lopez, a hotel maintenance worker, found her body in one of 4,000-gallon tanks located on the roof that provided water to guest rooms, a kitchen, and a coffee shop. Pardon me, I'm a little nauseous. Through the open hatch, he saw Alisa lying face up in the water. The tank was drained and cut open since its maintenance hatch was too small to accommodate equipment needed to remove the body, leading many people to wonder just how she got in there in the first place. Now, while I'm not going to go into detail about what her body looked like, and I'm questioning why that information in such precision is easily found public knowledge, there was no evidence of physical trauma, self-ending, intercourse, or force. Toxicology tests showed traces consistent with prescription medication found amongst her belongings, plus non-prescription drugs, like ibuprofen. So normal stuff in her system. A very small quantity of alcohol was present, but no other recreational drugs. Yes, I know, her body was eventually found, but she did vanish for long enough to have it count for today's list. In second place, we have Jessica Kinsey. Being a young adult of school-attending age, she lived with her family southwest of St. Louis in the close-knit community of Union. This tale begins on Boxing Day of 1995, when she wanted to go to a friend's house to show off her new winter wear she had been gifted, and her parents, who worked from home, allowed her to head off. At 2 p.m., she called her mother, Mary Klein, to let her know that she was staying away for a few more hours, promising to call back around 5 if she was going to stay for supper. Jessica did not call home, and her family never saw her ever again. At 5:30 p.m., her mother, Mary, called the friend's mother, who told her that Jimmy Hopkins, aged 23, picked up Jessica, and that Jessica had asked her to let Mary know, but the friend's mom had totally forgotten. Mary had known Jimmy since he was 11, when he moved to Union to live with his mother, and he was a close friend to the entire family. Mary called the Union Police Department to report her daughter missing when Jessica failed to return home because she didn't trust Jimmy's intention with her daughter. So he might have been a close family friend, but it's the kind of close family friend that you just sort of keep at a distance. Mark Henderson told the police that Jimmy paid him to drive himself and Jessica to Cloverdale, Indiana, stating that Jessica was quiet in the car's back seat and kept her head down the entire trip. Jimmy had told Mark that the end goal for the trip was to go to Niagara Falls to get married, having shown Mark his grandmother's engagement ring as proof, saying they had to meet with a friend in Cloverdale who would help them the rest of the way. Once in Cloverdale, the trio checked into the Dollar Inn Motel with Jessica and Jimmy in room 222, while Mark stayed next door in room 224. Mark first said he heard a lot of banging noises coming from the room in the middle of the night that kind of sounded like a body hitting the wall. Out of concern, he went and knocked on the door and received no response for about 5 minutes. And then Jimmy hollered out that everything was fine, simply that he and Jessica were having rough intercourse. Mark later changed his story, saying that Jimmy came to the door fully dressed, but blocked his view of the room and would not let him inside. Which version do you believe? The most important thing, though, is that he never saw Jessica. When he went to retrieve the duo the following morning, they had disappeared, along with his car. Mark reported the vehicle stolen to the Cloverdale police, but they failed to enter the report into the National Crime Information Center database for over 30 days. On December 27th, Jimmy sold the wedding rings at a pawn shop in Paris, Tennessee, so 300 miles southwest of Cloverdale. And about a month after Jessica's disappearance, Mark's vehicle turned up across the country in Compton, California, after Cloverdale police had finally entered the car into the NCIC. An unidentified black male dropped the car off at a garage on January 6th of 1996. We don't know anything more about him. The following spring, police learned that another acquaintance of Jimmy's said he had seen him with a girl matching Jessica's description, with the investigators discovering that he worked at a yogurt shop in Los Angeles. The shop's owner confirmed to the police that a young girl had often visited the shop while Jimmy worked his shift. Jimmy returned to Missouri alone in June of 1996 and hooked up with his second wife, Anna. He refused to cooperate with the police investigating Jessica's disappearance. It wasn't until 2005 when police tried speaking to Jimmy, off the record, with the police chief afterwards claiming he was certain Jimmy had ended Jessica's life, but couldn't use anything he said in the session because officers had not read him his Miranda rights. Okay, my brain is boggled. Whatever was said between Jimmy and the police chief is still unknown. Police believe that someone else has vital information about Jessica's disappearance and have made public appeals over the years. However, no one's come forward. Oh, and before anyone wants to try to talk to Jimmy ever again, he took his own life in 2008, so he's not talking anymore. Not that he ever really was in the first place. In first place, we end our list with Claudia Kershak. In May of 2000, New York-based travel writers Claudia and Tanya were traveling to Havana, Cuba on a business trip, but found the trip suddenly canceled during their layover in Negreet, Jamaica. While disappointed, the duo were determined to make the most of it. At a resort in Negreet, Claudia made friends with Anthony Grant, one of the resort's bartenders. She was a big fan of reggae music, and Anthony reportedly offered to take her to a nearby club. Now, Tanya managed to book a flight home and agreed to meet up with Claudia when she got back to New York City. A lifeguard was reportedly the last person to see Claudia the next afternoon, when she was walking on a local beach far away from the resort. On June 2nd, Claudia's parents were notified that she hadn't shown up for work in New York and contacted the resort in Jamaica. By this point, hotel maids had reported Claudia missing after noticing she had not slept in her bed for several days, but all of her belongings were still in her room. Her passport, credit card, cell phone, and almost $200 in cash were recovered from the hotel safe, right where she had left them. Claudia's mom, Mary, told the press that Claudia was a very organized person and would have brought her belongings with her had she planned any sort of excursion or variance in her trip. As soon as they found out their daughter was missing, Claudia's parents were on the next plane to Jamaica, but their attempts to find out what happened to their daughter hit one dead end after another, beginning at the resort where Claudia had been staying. As a security precaution, the license plates of all vehicles entering and leaving the resort should have been carefully recorded in a logbook. Conveniently, the logbook for the month that Claudia disappeared was missing. Then a videotape from a surveillance camera mounted near Claudia's room had been recorded over. Oh, finally, the room where Claudia stayed was cleared by housekeeping and hotel security before it could be processed for clues. Seems a little sus. Just a smidge. Now, frustrated by the progress of the investigation, Claudia's parents brought in the FBI and an American search and rescue team. Rightfully so. According to a canine handler on the case, his dog tracked Claudia's scent to the home of Anthony Grant, that bartender I mentioned a moment ago. At Anthony's home, the dog hit the scent on a pair of boots, a pair of gloves, a knife. Oh, and it found Claudia's scent in the trunk and back seat of Anthony's car. Anthony was investigated and polygraphed, but the results were inconclusive. The FBI stated that they interviewed Anthony for several weeks, but they don't consider him a suspect. Now, the parents have struggled to keep the search for Claudia alive, despite dwindling leads and diminishing support, and are still offering a $50,000 reward for answers. I hope they get some.
Number 5 on this list is D.B. Cooper. This is one of the craziest cases ever, and honestly, when I was reading it, I had to confirm that it was actually real life. So, back in 1971, on November 24th, a plane hijacking occurred. D.B. Cooper, who called himself Dan Cooper, boarded a plane from Portland to Seattle. While he was on the plane, he revealed to the stewardesses that he had a with him, and he demanded that he get 4 parachutes and $200,000. Whether this was a real or just a fake is unknown because it never actually went off, but it was at least convincing enough to the people on board that they gave him what he wanted. The flight landed and he let off the passengers but held on to the crew. Now that he had his money and his parachutes, he wanted a flight to Mexico or else he'd blow everybody sky high. This was agreed to and the plane took off for Mexico. It was dark at this point, but that was all part of Cooper's plan. While the plane was mid-air, Cooper took one of his parachutes and his money and he jumped straight out of the plane into the night. So that was back in 1971, and since then no one has ever seen or heard from him since. This disappearance is one of the most famous in history and something that's baffled the FBI since it happened. In 2016 they closed the case but never really did find anything concrete about Cooper. Tons of theories have popped up over the years though about who he really was and where he went. The most popular and likely the most probable was that Cooper just died after he jumped out of the airplane. Either he didn't stick the landing or he died in the wilderness that he would have landed in. Alternatively though, people think that Cooper was actually a man named Robert Rackstraw who was a military helicopter pilot. There was a mild break in the case where in 2011 the niece of Lynn Doyle Cooper came forward and said that it was her uncle that did it as he planned the whole thing at a family gathering. But that could never be confirmed and the case has since gone dead. Number 4 on this list is the Phantom Barber. This was one of the strangest cases in history and remains unsolved to this day. In 1942, in a small town in Mississippi, there was a crime spree that happened which centered around a barber. A man who would break into homes and while people were sleeping cut their hair off. They would wake up to these ridiculous haircuts feeling very violated. These hair crimes persisted for a while until they escalated to violence. The home of Terrell Heidenberg and his wife was broken into and they were attacked by a man with an iron pipe. This same man was believed to be the Phantom Barber. This incident really ramped up the search for the man and somebody was eventually brought into custody. 57-year-old William Dolan was arrested and charged with the crimes. In his home it was found that he had several samples of human hair. It also didn't help his case that he was a chemist and it was believed that the victims of the Phantom Barber were incapacitated with chloroform before having their hair cut off. This seemed like all the evidence needed until William Dolan actually passed a lie detector test in regards to the crime. Then accusations of the police work came out saying that they rushed the process and mishandled evidence. This led to William's eventual release, which means that the Phantom Barber just totally disappeared. If William truly is innocent, then nobody has any idea who this criminal was and why they were doing what they were doing in the first place. William has been the only credible suspect and the case has since gone dead after extensive investigation.
In our third spot we have Patrick Carnes. On April 13th, 2011, 86-year-old Patrick, or Pat Carnes, and his dog Lucky disappeared off of a stretch of I-80 in Nevada. This stretch is often called the Big Lonely. During that drive, he got pulled over by a state trooper for doing an illegal lane change. During the conversation, he told the state trooper that he was following a trucker to the next town where he was going to get a room for the night. That was the last time anyone had ever seen or heard from Pat and Lucky. The next morning, his vehicle was found abandoned at the side of the road. In the car was Pat's luggage, wallet, and checkbook, but no signs of Pat or Lucky. That's when the investigation began. Police conducted over 600 hours of canine searches, they had ATVs doing off-road searches, and even had planes flying over the area. Nothing came of any of this. Police are convinced that Pat was the victim of a serial killer. Maybe the person driving the truck that he was following was the serial killer that gained Pat's trust. I mean, 5 years earlier, an abandoned car was found in the exact same spot as Pat's. Its driver, Judith Casita, disappeared also and has never been found. And apparently, hitchhikers also frequently go missing along that road. So it might just be that there's a serial killer loose in that area. Coming in at number 2, we have Cynthia Anderson. On August 4th, 1981, Cynthia Anderson left for work at a law firm in Toledo, Ohio. When her employers arrived, they found Cynthia's car in the parking lot, but Cynthia was not at work. What's freaky is that the book she was reading was left open to a page about a violent kidnapping. What's even scarier is that a year prior, Cindy apparently had reoccurring scary dreams about being abducted and murdered by a stranger. During the investigation, police discovered that the only items missing were Cindy's car keys and purse. There were no evidence of forced entry or struggles in the office. They also found that no calls were answered after 10 a.m., so it's believed that she was abducted around that time. Now, people believe that one of the attorneys that works at her law firm had something to do with her disappearance. A month later, he went to prison for dealing drugs. Authorities think that Cynthia knew about this and was kidnapped and then killed to prevent her from leaking the information. But we don't truly know. And in our number 1 spot, we have Rebecca Corium. Rebecca Corium was a 24-year-old worker on the Disney Wonder cruise ship. She disappeared on or from the ship on March 22, 2011. At 5:45 that morning, she was seen on CCTV footage talking on the phone, wearing men's clothing, and she was visibly distressed. After she hung up the phone, she was never seen again. At 9 a.m., Rebecca didn't show up for her shift. That's when the Disney staff were told to search the ship for her. This came of nothing. Then the US Coast Guards and Mexican Navy were contacted to search the ocean, thinking that she may have fallen overboard. Again, nothing. Here's where it gets interesting. Many people think that Disney knows exactly what happened to Rebecca and have attempted to cover the whole thing up. Let me share with you the facts. For starters, the captain told Rebecca's parents that he believes she was swept off of Deck 5 by a big wave. However, there were no indications of stormy weather that night, let alone a rogue wave. Then the crew showed her parents the CCTV footage of her daughter on that phone call. They claim that this was from Deck 5, saying that after the phone call, she went out on the deck where she was wiped out by the wave. But the footage was cropped to hide the timestamp and location. In fact, it was from Deck 1, not Deck 5. On top of that, the Disney crew gave the parents a sandal that they claim was Rebecca's, which they found on the deck. But the sandal was the wrong size and style of Rebecca. Even a crew member stated, and I quote, "Disney knows exactly what happened. That phone call she had, it was taped. Everything here is taped. There's CCTV footage everywhere. Disney has the tape." So he believes that Disney has the footage that shows exactly what happened to Rebecca, but they aren't releasing it with fear that it will tarnish their happy family-friendly reputation.
Number 5 on this list is the forest of Brocéliande. Now this forest has literally had young men enter into it and then never come out again. Matador Network says, according to some Celtic legends dating back to the Middle Ages, this forest in the northern part of France was said to have a mystical aura. Some people believe these woods are the ones described in the legends of King Arthur. The wizard Merlin was said to have been briefly imprisoned in an invisible tower here and is thought to be buried at a mysterious location widely called the Tomb of Merlin. Also here is the Val Sans Retour, or Valley of No Return, where it's said that the King Arthur sorceress, half-sister Morgan Le Fay, trapped and held young knights who were not faithful. After researching a decent amount about Morgan Le Fay, pretty much all of the legends indicate she's evil. She was initially supposed to be a healer, but then turned bad and got corrupted by witchcraft. Obviously, she was using this witchcraft for no good in this forest as well. Don't get me wrong, folks, being unfaithful and cheating on your partner, that isn't cool, but I also don't think that every single person who does it needs to get murdered by an evil witch. No one knows her exact kill count as far as how many men she lured in here to disappear forever, but from my reading, it certainly seems like a lot. It should also be noted that this forest underwent a horrible forest fire in 1990, and many people thought that there could be some sort of link to the curse that surrounds this place in some way. I don't know if that's true or not, but this was a particularly horrible forest fire, and considering what has happened here in the past, I wouldn't be totally shocked. If you do manage to make it through this forest without disappearing, then there could be great wonders awaiting if you manage to find Merlin's tomb. I would only imagine that there's some pretty incredible treasure or magical artifacts in that tomb if one was to find it. Granted, we have had hundreds of years to do so and no luck so far. Probably best to just stay away from this place and not risk disappearing for good yourself. Number 4 on this list is Smolensk Forest. This forest was particularly deadly if you happened to be a Polish soldier. That's right folks, this forest was host to one of the deadlier battles in all of history. Matador Network says, this really was the site of the Katyn Massacre. During World War II, a mass grave with 20,000 Polish soldiers and military leaders secretly slaughtered by Joseph Stalin's army was discovered. Only a decade ago, a plane carrying nearly 100 of the most important political and business officials of Germany crashed here, killing everyone on board. It was a shocking day for the people of Poland, for whom this scary forest was already the site of a painful history. You can forgive them for believing that this patch of earth is cursed. So that's what happened, and you better believe that it's left something behind. Tons of ghostly apparitions have been sighted here throughout the years. I mean, I think when 20,000 people die, plus the tragedy with the plane, that it's just simply too much for an area to handle, and bam, now we have a haunting. Now I think it's safe to say that people have definitely disappeared here in the past based on the circumstances. But that doesn't mean that we're all good now either. I highly doubt that the ghosts who live here are going to be totally cool with people just cutting through their home now. Extreme fog has been reported here from the locals, fog that comes on super fast without warning. It would be very easy for ghosts to snatch somebody up in all of that and make you disappear if they wanted to. Tread very carefully in Smolensk Forest. Number 3 on this list is Alcatraz escapees. Alcatraz is potentially the most famous prison in all of history. It opened in 1934 and then shut down only 29 years later in 1963. 29 years is not a super long time considering the notoriety that this place got, but it all makes sense when you factor in the people who used to call this place home. Al Capone and Robert Strode are just some of the most notable high-profile inmates who used to stay here. Based on who was sent here and the overall geography of the prison in general, it quickly got the reputation for housing the world's most dangerous criminals. That's why it was so shocking when 3 people broke out in 1962. On June 12th of that year, the guards conducted a head count and realized that 3 people were missing. Frank Morris, John Anglin, and Clarence Anglin were all nowhere to be seen. All 3 men have been involved with some very dangerous armed robberies over the years, among other very illegal activities. The way that they escaped was truly ingenious. I don't have enough time to explain exactly how they did it in this video, but it was a mixture of disguises and tunnels and just a bunch of incredible prison break stuff. Either way, this sparked one of the largest FBI manhunts in history. The thing is, they literally had no leads at all. It's tough for there to be witnesses when the prison that they're breaking out from is in the middle of the water. The FBI eventually closed the case, basically telling the public that they believe that the men died during their escape, drowning on their way to land. This is certainly possible, but over the years, people have said that they've seen these criminals out in public. These sightings never resulted in any capture though, and the fate of the men still remain a complete mystery. Number 2 on this list is the Sims family killer. Stacker writes, in 1966, the grisly murder of a prominent family rocked Tallahassee, Florida, when 17-year-old Norma Jeanette Sims returned home from a babysitting gig to find her mother, father, and 12-year-old sister bound, gagged, shot, and stabbed to death. The case, which changed the previously quiet community, forever remains unsolved. Although a local pastor was long suspected, Leon County Sheriff Larry Campbell, who was a 24-year-old deputy and early responder that night, has said he knows of 2 suspects who he believes did it, although he refuses to name them to this day. 3 people brutally murdered for no apparent reason. The Sims family was apparently admired by people in their community and had no real enemies. When investigators got to the scene, robbery was also ruled out immediately because nothing of value was taken. The biggest person of interest was a pastor that Helen Sims had recently stopped working for. The fact of the matter was, though, that nothing of any value was discovered in this case, and even though it has been opened numerous times by various forms of law enforcement, the killer or killers could never be identified. Something like this just really reminds you how valuable life can be. A loving family taken far too soon for no known reason, and the individual responsible was never even caught. And finally, number 1 on this list is the Zodiac Killer. This is the type of thing that should keep us all up at night. The Zodiac Killer was a serial killer who was active in Northern California from 1968 to 1969. During their reign of terror, this unidentified serial killer is believed believed to have murdered at least 5 separate victims. The Zodiac Killer claimed that they had 37 different victims, but that's not ever been confirmed. Wikipedia writes, the Zodiac originated the name himself in a series of taunting letters and cards that he mailed to regional newspapers, threatening killing sprees and bombings if they were not printed. Some of the letters included cryptograms or ciphers in which the killer claimed that he was collecting his victims as slaves for the afterlife. Of the 4 ciphers he produced, 2 remain unsolved, and 1 took 51 years to crack. While many theories regarding the identity of the killer have been suggested, the only suspects authorities ever publicly named was Arthur Leah Allen, a former elementary school teacher and convicted sex offender who died in 1992. All of the evidence that has pointed to Allen being the killer is circumstantial though. There was never anything that beyond a reasonable doubt could place him at the locations of the murders or make him the guy who did this. Many people think that it was him, but they could be wildly wrong. If they are wrong, which is still very likely, then this killer may still be out there on the loose. But
Number 5, Amelia Earhart. So, she was an American aviation pioneer, being the first female aviator to fly solo across the Atlantic Ocean. She set many other records and was one of the first aviators to promote commercial air travel. You know, she wrote best-selling books about her flying experiences, along with being instrumental in the formation of the 99s, an organization for female pilots. On July 2nd, though, of 1937, Amelia Earhart flew towards Howland Island, one of the last stops on her attempt to be the first woman to fly around the world. Nearing the tiny Pacific island, she radioed the Itasca, a United States Coast Guard cutter anchored off of, Howland's coast, to ask it to guide her onto land with radio signals. "We must be on you, but cannot see you. Gas is running low. Been unable to reach you by radio. We are flying at 1,000 feet. Amelia's last confirmed message indicated that she was flying on a northwest to southeast navigational line that bisected the island, but she didn't indicate in which direction she was heading. And that was it. That was the last we ever heard from her. After that communication at 8:43 a.m., radio contact was lost and nobody knows what happened next. Several expeditions have tried to locate the plane's wreckage, but have had zero luck. By studying Amelia's final radio transmissions and calculating what is known about the plane's fuel supply, researchers have narrowed their search to a 630 square mile area of the ocean. Now, theories about what happened have ranged in extremes, from simply crashing and sinking, to being captured and held as a war prisoner, living as castaways that were never found, that it was a government cover-up, or she simply restarted her life in anonymity. Feel free to post your favorite theory in the comments. And hey, maybe one of these days we'll finally have an answer. Hey, the crew that found Anastasia, I got a project for you. Number 4, Captain Oates. I am just going outside and maybe some time. Those were the last words of the Antarctic explorer, Captain Lawrence Edward Grace Titus Oates. He uttered them prior to walking into a blizzard and certain death. Oates was a member of Robert Falcon Scott's ill-fated Terra Nova expedition to the South Pole between 1910 and 1913. He was selected primarily due to his strength and military experience, and was put in charge of the 19 ponies that were brought along. The Terra Nova sailed from Cardiff, Wales on the 15th of June of 1910 and made it to Ross Island on January 4th of 1911. Now, Oates, Scott, and 14 other people left Cape Evans on November 1st of 1911 in pursuit of being the first to the pole. During the trip, many men were sent back to base camp until only Oates, Scott, Edward A. Wilson, Henry R. Bowers, and Edgar Evans remained to complete the grueling trip. Now, Oates didn't appear to have a fondness for Scott, as he expressed, "Myself, I just like Scott intensely. It would chuck the whole thing if it was not that we are a British expedition and must beat those Norwegians. Scott is not straight. It is himself first and the rest nowhere. Make of that what you will." The single party was victorious and reached the pole on January 17th of 1912, but alas, the victory was short-lived when the men discovered a tent and note from their Norwegian Roald Amundsen, who informed them that he and his party had made it to the pole on December 14th, thus beating the British team by a mere 34 days. Now, the return journey proved to be extremely strenuous and difficult due to weather conditions, lack of food, scurvy, and frostbite. Not a fun party. Edgar Evans was the first to pass away, while Oates had become severely frostbitten and weak. He had become, in Scott's words, a terrible hindrance due to the others. At lunch on March 15th, Oates proposed that the others should leave him behind in a sleeping bag, but they persuaded him to go on. So he woke up the next morning, March 16th, and according to Scott, he said, "I am just going outside and maybe some time." He went out into the blizzard, and we have not seen him since. Now, we knew that poor Oates was walking to his death, but we thought, we tried to dissuade him, since we knew it was the act of a brave man and an English gentleman. Sadly, this made no difference for the remaining Scott, Wilson, and Bowers, who passed away shortly after. Hey look, frostbite and scurvy, that's just a lethal combination.
Number 3 on this list is Epping Forest. There could be some very scary and questionable characters lurking in this forest, people who you really shouldn't want to mess with. Matador Network says, part of the dense urban forest that London comprises, the 9 square mile Epping Forest has long been the perfect place for criminals to lay low or to bury their murdered victims. Frighteningly, more than a dozen such victims have been discovered here in the last half century. At least one murder took place in the forest itself at the hands of a notorious highwayman, Dick Turpin. Many of the trees here haven't been cut in nearly 150 years, following legislation to protect the area, leaving them with weirdly deformed shapes. Add in reportedly creepy sounds and ghostly sightings, and this is one hair-raising walk through the woods. Yeah, so when I was referencing the questionable characters, I was talking about deadly criminals, and when I said that you might not want to run into them, well, that's because they could just kill you. Clearly some sort of operation is going on in this forest. Maybe some type of drug deal that goes down here or something like that. If you happen to be going into this forest at the wrong time and stumbled upon something like that, then that's game over. Your picture perfect hike is turning bad really fast. Clearly tons of people have disappeared here over the years. Best to steer clear of this forest if you don't want to end up joining them. Number 2 on this list is the Dow Hill Forest. This forest is located in India and is a place where once you enter, you may never leave. Matador Network says many murders are said to have taken place in these ominous mist-filled woodlands. Reports claim that those who enter feel that they are being watched, and some have even spied a red eye gazing at them and have caught a fleeting glance of an apparition in an ash-colored dress. The most oft-heard rumor is of a headless boy walking on his way from the forest along Death Road to the Dow Hill Victoria Boys School, itself considered one of the most haunted locations in India. Residents who live nearby say that they hear sounds emerging from the school even when it's not in session. Any forest that has a road called Death Road just casually running through it, yeah, that's not a forest for me, guys. Hiking is supposed to be a relaxing and fun experience, not one where you're fearing for your life. That mist that I mentioned earlier as well, apparently that stuff is thick. Like really thick. So thick that you can barely see the ground that you're walking on. Clearly, it's not just naturally occurring, but some sort of paranormal entity is manifesting it. And number 1 on this list is the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. This national park is a beautiful forested area in North Carolina and Tennessee. The reason that it's made this list is because there have literally been a decent amount of documented disappearances here that no one's been able to solve. The NY Post says the first took place on June 4th, 1969, when 6-year-old Dennis Martin was scheming with his brother and 2 other boys in the park's Spence Field while on an annual family camping trip. They were planning to sneak up on their family and startle them. But when the boys ran and jumped on the adults, Dennis was nowhere to be found. On October 8, 1976, while on a horticulture field trip with 40 of her classmates, 16-year-old Trenny Lynn Gibson was hiking along Andrews Bald. No one can recall seeing her after 3 p.m. Searches continued for months, but no trace of Gibson was ever found. 58-year-old Thelma Pauline Melton was hiking near Deep Creek Campground, a trail she'd been on many times before, on September 25, 1981. She was with friends when she walked ahead of them and vanished over a hill, but they couldn't find her on the other side, nor could they find her at the campground where she was staying. Where are these people going, and why can't anyone find them? It's been decades and there still isn't any trace of these folks. Yes, obviously this is a big park and it would be hard to locate someone if they tripped and fell. But still, this has got people thinking that something far more sinister is afoot. A killer of some kind, potentially, who uses this park as their hunting grounds. Whether this killer is human or some type of entity, no one knows for sure. Just stay away from this park so you don't need to be the one to find out.
Number 4, the Mary Celeste. Our next mysterious case is a bit of an outlier, a little bit of a cheat, I know. It's not just one person going missing, it's an entire ship. How does that happen? December 1872, the captain of the Mary Celeste, one Benjamin Briggs, cast off to New York to travel to Italy for unknown reasons, but probably for the tomatoes. The ship was kept to a rather tight crew. A staff of 8, plus Briggs's wife and daughter, were enough to man the vessel. The voyage seemed like it went pretty well until another vessel, the Del Gratia, came into contact with the Celeste and were chilled at what they'd found when they recovered the ship drifting aimlessly. As rescuers boarded the ship, they were greeted with a maritime mystery to forever haunt them. The ship seemed to be in perfect working order, no signs of damage or distress. Had it not been found freely floating, they'd assumed the ship was just built. Aside from a single lifeboat missing, the ship was in good condition, the holds stocked with food and water. The crew's personal belongings were scattered about. The table was set for a meal, as if the crew had been minutes away from breaking bread. So what happened? What reasonable captain would abandon a perfectly serviceable, well-stocked ship? While reasonable explanations were offered, theories of piracy or mutiny prevailing. Now, the ship being relatively untouched does call into question the notion of piracy, as I don't know how much you know about pirates, but they didn't tend to leave the rum behind if there is any. Any pirate captain worth his salt would have plundered that thing down to the floorboards. And there didn't appear to be any struggle at all, so no forceful evacuation, nobody kicked them off the ship. So with rationale out of the way, we've nowhere left to turn but blind and wild speculation. Theories of supernatural beings, cursed gold, vengeful spirits, sea monsters, Davy Jones. Take your pick of whatever nautical bedtime story you think could have overtaken the Mary Celeste. So you know what? Let me know down below. I love pirate ghost stories more than anything. Perhaps it was a bit of sea madness? Cabin fever? Maybe it's whatever happened to those two guys in the lighthouse happened to them here? No matter how you slice it, the vanishing of the Mary Celeste is a head scratcher of a mystery. More lost souls to the darkness that lurks below the ocean's water. Wary yourselves against the whispers that echo the seas, for the spirits of the Mary Celeste may still be watching, eager to claim another.
And number 3, Percy Faucet. So, if you ever wondered who or what inspired Indiana Jones, look no further than Mr. Percy Harrison Fawcett, who is rarely seen without his trademark Stetson hat. As someone who recently cosplayed a femme version of Indiana Jones, trust me when I say I understand the importance of never losing that dang hat. It was a struggle to keep it on all day. In terms of the real man though, his resume included a stint as a British artilleryman in Sri Lanka, a tour of duty in World War I, and a top secret gig as a spy in Morocco. He was most famous though for his half a dozen map-making expeditions to the wilds of the Amazon, a place he called the last great blank space in the world. Beginning in 1906, Fawcett had ventured into previously uncharted territory in Brazil and Bolivia, where he dodged poisonous pit vipers and made contact with local tribes. His exploits grabbed headlines around the world and won him a prestigious medal from the Royal Geographical Society. Along with making his name as one of the world's great explorers, Fawcett's adventures also led him to develop the theory that an advanced and ancient city lay in the Amazon. His run-ins with locals had convinced him that it was possible for large groups to thrive in the unforgiving environment of the rainforest, and he'd stumbled upon references to sophisticated settlements and the histories of the European conquistadors. He was particularly enthralled by a Portuguese fortune hunter's 1753 account of a stone jungle metropolis of great size and grandeur, if you will. As the years passed, Fawcett became more and more obsessed with seeking out his modern-day El Dorado, which he dubbed the city of Z, or Zed if you're Canadian. He launched 2 searches for it in the early 1920s, but was driven out of the jungle on both occasions by poor weather, fever, and exhaustion. It took more than 3 years of campaigning before he finally secured funding for a 3rd mission. Now, despite warnings that he was taking off on a fool's errand, the 57-year-old explorer remained convinced that Z was lurking somewhere in the unexplored Mato Grosso region of Brazil. Now, Fawcett had no shortage of volunteers for his final expedition, but he opted to take along his 21-year-old son Jack, who shared his near-religious zeal for the Z theory, and his son's best friend, Remer. After loading up on mosquito netting, canned food, machetes, and other provisions, the essentials, the trio set sail from New Jersey in January of 1925, vowing to return with proof for once and for all. The Fawcett expedition first sailed for Rio de Janeiro before trekking inland to the remote Amazonian outpost of Cuiabá, where they purchased pack animals and hired a pair of local guides. Now on April 20th, they ventured into the jungle for the first time. Ahead of them laid a sweltering maze of dense undergrowth, piranha-infested rivers, and unmapped territory populated by, hostile locals. During the expedition's early weeks, however, it was the insects that proved the most pressing threat. Swarm mosquitoes and gnats attacks made sleep difficult and travel miserable, and Rimmel's foot became severely swollen from tick bites. Undeterred though, Faucet set a demanding pace of between 10 to 15 miles a day, and during one leg he got so far ahead of his young companions that he was forced to camp alone for a night. Now on May 29th, the team reached the spot where Faucet had been forced to call it quits during one of his earlier searches. There they unloaded their equipment and sent their guides back to Cuyaba. Before the locals left though, Faucet handed over the last of the expedition's dispatches. Among them was a letter to his wife Nina. "Jack is well and fit and getting stronger every day," it read. "You need have no fear of any failure." And at that, the trio struck off into the bush alone. Now Faucet had warned that his expedition would go dark once it entered uncharted territory, but by 1927, nearly 2 years had passed with no word from the colonel or his young companions. So that letter was his last words. Now newspapers that had previously hailed Faucet as being impervious to the perils of the jungle began speculating that he was dead. Eyewitnesses surfaced with bewildering rumors about his whereabouts. One man claimed Faucet was now living in the jungle, another that he was being held prisoner by the locals. Still another maintained that he became chief of a tribe of people eaters among the river I can no longer pronounce. In 1928, the Royal Geographical Society's George Miller Diet launched the first expedition to search for Faucet and his party. He emerged from the jungle convinced that the expedition had perished, but he had no hard evidence and was unable to locate any bodies. In the years since the expedition, the mystery surrounding Faucet's disappearance has lured scores of other would-be rescuers and investigators into the Amazon. It's estimated that as many as 100 of them have passed in the jungle, and a few have followed in the explorer's footsteps by vanishing without a trace. As recently as 1996, a team of Faucet hunters led by a wealthy businessman named James Lynch was captured by locals and held for ransom. They only escaped with their lives after giving up $30,000 worth of equipment. Now researchers have blamed the disappearance on everything from malaria and parasitic infection to starvation, drowning, and jaguar attacks, just to name a few. Some have even argued that Faucet's long-time dabbling in mysticism means he vanished on purpose and set up an occult commune in the jungle. Now Faucet's fate may never be known for sure, but we know his last words. Also, in recent years, evidence has shown that his theory about a sophisticated jungle city wasn't a total fantasy. Excavations have revealed the ruins of garden cities with earthen defensive walls, complex road networks, and enough space for thousands of inhabitants. Number 2, Titanic billionaire. I'm sure we all know about the sub-implosion earlier this year that was responsible for the end of way too many lives too early. The chilling final text of the British billionaire trapped inside the Titanic-bound submersible that vanished deep below the water off of Newfoundland revealed that weather had been bad for sea travel in the days leading up to the trip. So a day before the OceanGate Expeditions operated sub was launched, renowned world explorer Hamish Harding sent his friend, retired NASA astronaut Colonel Terry Virts, an update on his grand voyage set to drop 12,500 feet beneath the surface to view the famous shipwreck. Here's the last words, folks. "Hey, we're headed out tomorrow. It looks good. The weather's been bad, so they've been waiting for this." Well, we know how that one ended. Number 1, Captain Robert Scott. "To my widow" is an ominous beginning to a letter. One can only wonder at the effect those 3 words had on Kathleen Scott, the wife of famed polar explorer Captain Robert Scott. Of course, she already knew the worst news, that not only had her husband been beaten to the South Pole by the Norwegians, remember that fun little thing I talked about a moment ago? Yeah. But along with his expedition party, he had passed on the return. Yeah, if that sounds familiar, it should. The poor schmuck was on the same expedition as Captain Oates. If it was difficult to write, since it was 70 degrees below zero, and to quote Robert, they had nothing but the shelter of their tent, it must have been shattering to read. In the first section, Scott begins by saying, "We are in a very tight corner and I have doubts of pulling through." As history would show, Scott wasn't indulging in hyperbole. Indeed, over the weeks in which the letter was written, hope among Scott's party dipped to rock bottom. The odds always seemed to be stacked against them. Remember when they reached the South Pole, only to discover that the Norwegians had beat them by like a month? And then with dwindling supplies and hideous weather, the party had really struggled to make the journey from their pole to their camp, 1 Ton Depot. And exactly 1 month after they reached the pole, the group suffered its first casualty. By the time Scott had begun writing his final words, Petty Officer Evans, who had suffered a bad fall and subsequent psychological breakdown near the foot of the Beardmore Glacier, had already passed, and Oates followed on his 32nd birthday. But at this point, Scott had some hope. The cold weather never let up though. Scott and his remaining 2 colleagues died agonizingly short of 1 Ton Depot in their tent. In a final remark in his letter, he writes, "We have got to within 11 miles of our depot with 1 hot meal and 2 days cold food, and we should have got through but have been held for 4 days by a frightful storm. I think our best chance has gone. We've decided not to, end ourselves, but to fight it to the last for that depot." In 5th place, we're kicking this off with a submerged Jeep. Seeing as we don't know the exact identity for the missing and found woman, this tale begins with a call from a fisherman who said that he saw what looked to be a black Jeep submerged in a large lake in Marion County, Texas. mysterious. Not until much later, after a tow truck arrived, did anyone realize that someone was in the vehicle and that they were still alive. Captain Chuck Rogers, an investigator at the Marion County Sheriff's Office, has mentioned that he had no knowledge of just how long the Jeep was in the water before the phone call. And that's just one of several questions that remain unanswered about this whole thing. After that initial call on Friday morning, it took deputies around 18 minutes to reach the scene at Lake of the Pines, and it took a little longer for a truck from a nearby wrecker service to arrive. The Jeep was far away from shore, estimated at about 40 feet out in the water from Woody's Camp Boat Ramp. Okay, that's a fun name. The fisherman who called authorities stuck around, using his boat to help a tow truck worker get out to the Jeep and hook up a tow cable. We love a good Samaritan. When the team reached the Jeep, that was the moment they saw that there was a woman in the truck, turning the simple salvage of the vehicle into a full-on rescue operation. The fisherman and the tow truck driver helped get the woman out of the vehicle, pulling her into the fishing boat. Now, once the group reached land, deputies called an ambulance, and in the meantime, the woman was put in a car to, keep her warm before being taken to a nearby hospital. During the incident, it was determined that the woman was listed as a missing person from the Longview, Texas Police Department. She had been reported missing hours earlier, at 12:35 a.m., on Friday to be specific, to the police in Longview, a town some 24 miles south by southwest of the lake. Longview police said they couldn't share any more details about the woman or the circumstances that might have led to her predicament, which, it's totally valid. If she wants to protect her privacy, she absolutely has the right to do so. As for how the Jeep came to be in the lake, the Sheriff's Department says it hasn't turned up anything suspicious about the incident. The boat ramp the vehicle apparently used to drive into the lake sits after a slight curve from a long and roughly straight rural road. The police claim that there was nothing uncovered during the investigation to suggest this case was anything more than an accident. And for the first time ever, I'm hoping that they're right and this was just a weird fluke. I'm just glad the woman's okay. In fourth place, time to travel to Glacier National Park. At approximately 11 p.m. on May 8th, two Bear Air rescue helicopters located 19-year-old Matthew Reed, who was initially reported missing on Sunday, May 7th, thanks to a thermal heat signature. He was said to have gone off hiking on the Huckleberry Mountain Trail around noon on Friday, May 5th. Poor guy spent 4 days lost in the wilderness. Rescue personnel lowered a rescuer down to Reed's location and found him somewhat responsive. Matthew was extricated via a 175-foot hoist, flown out of the park, and transferred to Evergreen Ambulance. Sidebar, since I'm always curious, I'd love to hear from Matthew at some point what they defined as somewhat responsive. Was he without a voice? Was he too tired to move his arms? Look, I'm a professional nosy person, okay? That specific area of Huckleberry Mountain, located off the Camas Road in Glacier's North Fork region, is heavily forested, thick with brush, and very steep. Oh, good. Matthew has been reported as being in stable condition. Whew. Reports indicate he hiked the Huckleberry Lookout Trail on Friday and reached the first saddle where he encountered a snowfield covering the trail, where he slept into an unnamed drainage on the east side of Huckleberry Mountain. He descended into chest-deep snow, losing his phone, water bottle, and shoes. Upon determining that he could not make it back up the trail, he started working his way down the drainage. So Matthew was originally last heard from on that Friday afternoon. His vehicle was located on Sunday at the Huckleberry Lookout Trailhead after he was reported overdue to the Rangers. Rangers conducted a hasty search on Sunday afternoon before an expanded search began Monday morning. Glacier National Park would like to thank Two Bear Air, U.S. Border Patrol, Flathead County Sheriff's Office, North Valley, and the Flathead Search and Rescue for assisting in the search, with around 30 folks having helped. Huckleberry Lookout Trail has now officially reopened to the public once again, but cripes folks, be careful and don't hike alone. I feel like that should be the first rule of hiking or something, but I'm not a hiker.
Number 3. Frederick Valentich. Our next mysterious case is Frederick Valentich, an Australian pilot, a well-trained aerial ace. He had 150 hours of manned flight experience and was permitted to fly alone, provided it was in good weather conditions. He also had a love of extraterrestrial life, a deep desire to find that unknown above. Well, Valentich might have got his wish. Tragically, it might have cost him his life. The year was 1978. Frederick Valentich was performing a 125 nautical mile training flight flying to a small landmass called Kings Island. While at 4,500 feet in the air, Valentich thought he had seen something with him. The Melbourne Flight Service insisted that there wasn't anything in the air with it, but Frederick radioed back and said that there was something on his tail. He claimed that he saw something glowing with 4 repeating bright lights and was rushing past him, and he described it as shiny, metallic, and and chrome and looking like a small manned craft. Now, unsure what was happening, Valentich on radio to ground control told them that he was experiencing engine troubles inexplicably. Could this strange flying object be the source of these unexpected problems? Valentich complained out about whatever was following him to the Melbourne Flight Service, saying, "It's hovering and it's not an aircraft." Those would be the last words anyone ever heard from Frederick. Minutes after that last transmission, he went silent and the plane, or the mysterious craft, was never found. An intense search revealed nothing. No sign of the man. The only lead was a local farmer alleging that the day Frederick disappeared, he saw what looked like a civilian aircraft seemingly fused with what looked like a saucer. The farmer told authorities he was worried about being dismissed as a crackpot, so he didn't tell anyone what he saw that day. What do you think? Should he have checked his eyes better? Or was he perhaps the last person to see the remnant of Frederick Valentich before he was carried off into who knows what? Number 2. Michael Rockefeller. When Michael Rockefeller was born, he was born with a silver spoon to a lineage of millionaires in the late 1930s. His great-grandfather, one John Rockefeller, is one of the richest men to have ever lived. The Rockefellers had hoped that Michael would follow them in the family business. Michael, however, had other ideas and wanted to use his millions of dollars to goof off and take it easy, which is what most of us would, I think. Michael had wanderlust in his heart and a deep interest in anthropology, specifically focused on Nigerian, Mayan, and Aztec cultures. Michael's father sat on a board of a museum in New York where Michael would discover this passion, hoping to one day open a collection of indigenous art in New York. After some discussions with the Dutch Museum of Ethnology, terrible name, Michael had decided he would set out to the massive island off the coast of Australia, at the time known as Dutch New Guinea. In 1961, he set off to collect the art of the Asmat people who lived there. It would be a one-way trip. The Asmat people that he was going to study were very disconnected from the rest of the world. They had previously seen Dutch colonizers, but otherwise they weren't getting a ton of visitors. The Asmat believed that the land beyond their island was inhabited by spirits, and they saw the Euros and the Americans as supernatural beings that had come over from across the sea. Michael and his team were allowed to study the people, but were banned from purchasing or taking anything, which held a great deal of significance to the Asmat. Nonetheless, Michael was thrilled with everything he'd been finding and could not wait to open his exhibit. In November 1961, Michael was on a boat accompanied by other anthropologists when a sudden squall threw the boat off its course. 12 miles away from the shore, but Michael insisted he could swim for it, and he was never seen again. The Rockefellers would spend the next few months spending a small fortune trying to find Michael, but gave up after never uncovering anything. The case went cold for years, but officers believed that Michael hadn't been lost to the water, but was rather offered as part of a sacrifice. His head chopped off, his flesh eaten, his bones made into weaponry, you know. Fun stuff. An investigator, one Carl Hoffman, uncovered this while filming the Asmat people. He saw a group of men acting out a scene, miming the act of, removing someone's head from the rest of their neck and attacking them with spears. Now, we can't really find this footage, but through interpretation and translation was a stern warning to the other villagers that Hoffman reported. Pop your ears open and take a listen. Don't you tell this story to any other man. I hope you remember it, and you must keep this for us. I hope this is for you and you only. Don't talk to anyone, to other people, or another village. If people question you, don't answer. Don't talk to them because the story is only for you. If you tell it to them, you'll die. Or any other village because the story is only for us. I probably shouldn't have shared it just then. Now, maybe just scrub that.